Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about, well, what I call the axis of destiny, which is what the change of sign for the North Node and the opposite point, the South Node, really means in general for humanity, general themes, and also a little bit about what it means for us individually. Now, before I get on with the North Nodes, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you so much for all your responses to my year aheads. Now, I do these every year, but this past year was a real marathon because I had so much to talk about, and I really appreciate it. And if you haven't yet got your year ahead, please head to astrology.com and get yours. Which brings me to another point. I know that I don't do a lot of videos, maybe 2 a month, which isn't, a lot really. And the reason for that is that I have so much other work on my hands. I do a lot of writing, whether I'm writing books, and of course I'm working on a new one at the moment, or whether it's my Friday Bite, which if you love astrology, every Friday there's a big article by me on my website, which is all about what's just happened in the past week and what the astrological omens say about those and what's to come. And of course, there are all my audios and columns that I do. So it's a pretty big agenda for an astrologer. So that's why I don't do a lot of them. Anyway, that's enough said about that. And I might as well get on with this one because this is kind of special. And what is so interesting is that I'm recording this on the 19th of January. So this is the day that the ceasefire came into existence, and the exchange of hostages, well, it's set to take place as I talk to you, as I record this. So I don't know whether it all took place. It's all very, very fragile. But nonetheless, I wanted to mention this because, of course, all of this is happening, and Donald Trump is about to be inaugurated on the 20th. We had the huge fires in and around Los Angeles, all at this particular time, just as the North Node is slipping. Well, it goes backwards. It goes backwards through the signs. So it's just slipping into Pisces from Aries. And I find this very interesting because with the nodal axis in Aries, opposite point Libra, I did a video on that and I called that nodal axis the axis of war and peace. And I think it's quite interesting that that Gaza, Israel, Hamas, the attacks, the October the 7th attacks and everything that happened since then has all been on that particular Aries Libra axis. And as we slip into Pisces and Virgo, an axis which has so much to do with compassion in a funny kind of way, peace as well, we're seeing this kind of change. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But I just found that really, really interesting. Now, of course, the thing to remember about the nodes is they're not planets. So they don't have characteristics like planets. They're what I call, and have called this video, they are the axis of destiny, because where the North and South nodes are in our astrological natal charts, they are an axis and they are opposite signs. And we consider the North Node to be a kind of active, this life kind of direction. So the focus of that by sign and by house is where our energies, particularly a sense of what we were destined to be and do in this life, are focused. Whereas the South Node is where we've come from and has a direct relationship and set of reasons as to why we are going in this direction this lifetime. And there is a sense really that the South Node offers us a place of comfort because it's familiar to us. We know what that feels like. And there is an aura of negativity really around the South Node. It's almost like karma. We don't like that part of the existences that we've had that are difficult for us. But in a way, you could look at that the same way as all the things that we love in life that are bad for us, whether it's eating sugar and all those sweet treats, or whether it's, doing all sorts of things that we know probably are standing in the way of us fulfilling our purpose. And that's a little bit what the South Node is like. We slip back into those old comfort habits in the South Node, and that's why it's bad. Not so much that it's an evil place. That's what we don't want to think of it as. And the North Node is somewhere where we need to focus our energies. Now, in Vedic astrology, this is the kind of Indian, more Eastern system, then the nodes are really very active kind of members of the astrological family. They are considered to have characteristics. So you've got Rahu, the North Node, and Ketu, the South Node, and they have very different functions in existence. Now, we retain a tiny, tiny little bit of that in Western astrology by calling it the dragon's head, North Node, and calling it the dragon's tail, which is the South Node. And if you are interested in symbolism, then the dragon is a very powerful symbol. And if you go really back in time, when we look at the symbolism of what dragons were, think about St. George and the dragon and how dragons were slayed and needed to be slayed, yet they were also very powerful magical creatures. This aura goes round the North and South Node. And what I find quite interesting is that from the earliest days, a dragon was associated with animals, and therefore they were different from humans. And as we get sort of more deeply into it, we think about these great supreme mythological creatures, all powerful, that the greatest purpose or the greatest act we could do was have combat with the mythical dragon, and triumphing over the dragon was a really very powerful experience. And that's why we get all these kind of understandings about the North Node. It's mythical, and it's fateful consequences, if you like. And I think arguably it is one of the most important pieces of the astrological puzzle. So it's very well worth looking at your own nodal axis. Rather more, I have to say, in the sense of which houses that nodal axis is in, because that really is the direction of travel. The sign, as you can see, is a bit like Jupiter being in a sign for a whole year. Well, of course, the North Node is in a sign for 18 months. So it's kind of general. It's got an aura of influence about it, which you can draw from. But the more important factor are the houses that the North Node is in. So just to do the science bit, so we know where we are with the nodes, and I'm just putting up a little diagram here so that you can see sort of what I'm talking about. That the nodal axis, the North Node and the South Node, it's really where the points of the moon's orbit intersect with the ecliptic, which is that band, that belt, against the zodiac background that the sun and all the planets move. So it is that point of intersection. And of course, this is the point where eclipses occur around those degree areas. And that's why we get this enormous theme of fate and destiny. As we do with eclipses, we get these kind of random events that really change the shape of things, and the nodal axis is intimately involved with all of that. And of course, where the nodal axis is in your individual charts is where the eclipses took place in and around the time you were born. So they become very, very sensitive points in your natal chart. And they can be sensitive in the sense that when a planet passes over it, opposes it, well, but that means it's on the South Node, or squares it, then we've got a reaction. we've got something taking place that has to do with your life purpose, has to do with destiny. And also when we come to connecting with other people, if somebody's sun, moon, Mercury, Venus or Mars, ascendant, descendant, MCIC axis connects with your nodal axis, then that's a very meaningful relationship. This relationship was meant to happen. And of course, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It can be a working relationship. It could be someone who comes into your life and the presence of that person changes your life. So that's a really important aspect of the nodal axis in your chart. What it means, in a sense, in the direction of travel for your life, your personal destiny, but also when transits, progressions connect with your nodal axis, and those are key periods in your life where your destiny is fulfilled, or there are very destined events that happen. And also when people's personal planets connect with that nodal axis. These are people of consequence in your life. Now, I would also say, when we look at this, that you can't, you don't want to look at every single aspect, like a sextile, a quintile, a trine. Focus only on the hard aspects, and particularly the opposition, which of course is a conjunction to the other end, and the squares. And if you stick to that principle, you'll be able to connect with the effects of, well, what the nodal axis means in your natal chart, what it means to you, and also the events around the time that they're happening will also be you're more consciously aware of how they may contribute to your life purpose. So those are the things to bear in mind. Now, I did say a little bit earlier, and I was talking about the time I'm recording this and how the North Node, having been in Aries and Libra, which I call the axis of war and peace, how that has now faded. So we're into a new axis, and I call this axis, I've got a number of kind of names for it. I call it the axis of fear and faith, and also the axis of suffering and saving. Those two principles are at the heart of this particular nodal axis. And if we look at it in general and we think, what does this 18-month period mean for us if we focus on what our destiny is and what the meanings of this nodal axis is? We want to look particularly at the sign of Pisces and what it represents, which is where we get this idea of suffering, because Pisces, the final sign of the zodiac, it is a sign associated with suffering and sacrifice, and this is why we get so many people who respond to that by going into the healing professions or choosing to help and heal other people, either by what they do in their lives or whatever they may take up. And the interesting thing is, when you think about it, that when Jesus Christ was born and therefore set in motion the Christianity, the era of Christianity, if you like, the symbol the early Christians used was the fish. And we can say that the age of Pisces, which was brought in by many things, including the birth of Christ, has been with us for over 2,000 years. And we are now moving into a new age, the age of Aquarius. And if I had a name for this in light of what we were looking at in terms of Christianity and faith, we might also think that as the age of Aquarius begins, we are looking at the age of divine intelligence. So rather than the kind of image of the Son of God, so to speak, or whatever that represents in different religions follow different systems, but it's almost like a physical being was the representation of the spiritual God function. Whereas now, moving into Aquarius, we are moving into divine intelligence. We don't have a figure that will necessarily carry us through. But interestingly enough, and coming back to Jesus Christ again, although we celebrate Christ's birthday, on the 25th of December, Christmas time. Of course, that wasn't really when he was born, and there's been a lot of scholarly argument about when was he born, including, I've waded into this as well. And the general opinion is that actually Jesus Christ was a Virgo. He was born in the time of September, and probably at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunction, which would have been the star in the east that the Magi saw. So we are not exactly at 0 AD, but somewhere around 7 BC, 4 BC, 2 BC, depending on which scholarly opinion you choose to take. But I find that very interesting. As we look at this nodal axis on the Pisces-Virgo axis, we are bringing about some element of religion per se, spiritual life generally. And I think if there is a theme that we need all of us to kind of relate to, is this idea that while the North Node is moving through Pisces and its tail, so to speak, in Virgo, that we need to develop compassion for other people's suffering. That's a big thing. And I'm going to expand on this shortly, but it is this notion, really, that we should have compassion for our own pain, you know, what we are going through and we suffer. We have compassion for ourselves in this. We need compassion for others who are suffering, whether they are friends and family, our nearest and dearest, or whether we extend that out to all the peoples of the world suffering in their different ways. And again, this is so much front forward at this time with the idea of the hostages who have suffered, the people of Gaza who have suffered, and we should have compassion for their suffering, regardless of our political or religious beliefs. The whole idea of the suffering of humanity needs to be related to. Now, one of the other things that I think is rather interesting and adds a little extra layer to this North Node in Pisces as it moves through Pisces is that we've also got Saturn in Pisces at the moment, and we've also got Neptune in Pisces. And in a lot of my Friday Bites, and perhaps periodically when I've talked about Saturn in Pisces, I've talked about atonement. And we have seen a lot of people having to atone for their behaviors, you know, whether we go back to, you know, what started off the whole Me Too movement. We've seen it with Mohammed Fayed. We've seen it with famous film stars and presenters who've all had to account for their behaviors, particularly of a kind of abusive nature. And this has been a strong theme. And I think now we've got the North Node in Pisces. It's going to continue, even though, of course, during the course of this time, Saturn will enter Aries, as will Neptune, and they'll be conjunct. But, you know, frankly, I think all of it really resonates with this idea, well, of sacrifice and suffering, the divine versus the corporeal. And also, I think when we look at the North Node and the South Node in particular, this idea that because it's related to the moon or the moon's orbit, we get this idea that we have the world of lunar change, as it were, and randomness versus the control and orderliness, and in a way, the immutability of life on Earth. We have that polarity very much expressed by this particular nodal axis. Now, of course, if you happen to have been born with the North Node in Pisces or the North Node in Virgo, then this 18-month period for you is going to be huge. You know, I keep talking about aspects of our destiny being revealed to us and feeling that we've walked into situations that smack of fate and destiny. That is really the effects of having the nodal axis either connected by transit or whether you are having your nodal return. And it takes the North Node and the South Node, the opposite end, to work its way through the whole zodiac in 18.6 years, which is why it spends roughly 18 months in each sign. So a nodal return is a time of a rebooting. And again, it's going to vary as to where this nodal axis of where the North Node is in your natal chart as to what that particularly means for you. And I have done another video on this a couple of years ago, 18 months ago probably, which perhaps looked into that into a bit more detail. But I will refer to it again, not on this particular video, but I will look at the houses and the nodes, because that's another layer of individual meaning as opposed to the collective. And this particular video is more concerned with the collective, if you like. So yes, this idea of a return of your North Node to its natal position is a time of rebooting. Well, you know, many of the, I mean, it depends how old you are and how much experience you've had in life. But if you look back on the previous nodal returns, and I'm putting those up on the screen as we see right now, then you will have some idea of the experiences that have been important to you and important to your destiny. And with more consciousness and awareness about the events in our lives and what they mean, what they show us about ourselves and our purpose, are going to be really, really important for you. So yes, I've put a list on the left-hand side. You'll see where the North Node in Pisces has been in the years, really, since 1931. I know I have some definitely senior people who like to watch my videos. So I'm including going back almost, well, not quite 100 years, but a long way. And on the right-hand side, we can see when the North Node was in Virgo. So this is just as important in a way, if you have the North Node in Virgo, this kind of halfway, we might call it the nodal opposition, for you again to really consider, you know, what you can set in motion, if you like, to write your course. And I think all of us, and the longer we live again, we have this greater sense of why we're here. And if we feel we have veered off track somehow, then this is a time to see how we can get back on track. So that, yes, is a really important factor. Now, another way of looking at what the axis of destiny means for us this time around is to really look at what it meant in collective terms, in global events, 18 and so years ago. And there were many important events, of course, in an 18-month period, but the ones that really stood out to me, and the ones you will probably remember, first and foremost, was that it was a great economic global collapse in 2007. And we all remember that, and the Great Recession that followed. This occurred when the North Node was in Pisces. Now, I suspect as we go through this sequence of the node in Pisces, we're going to have a similar experience with the economy, the global economy, not just one economy or another, but globally. Maybe not immediately, maybe not tomorrow, but I certainly think we're going to see something like this in 2025. Now, the other thing I found was quite interesting. You know, I've talked a little bit about the idea of saving and healing, suffering and sacrifice. And one of the themes or one of the events that was significant in this period was that WikiLeaks was founded. And I think Julian Assange became a kind of figure of martyrdom for the cause, whether you hated him or you loved him. You know, he did bring things to light, and he suffered for his actions. And this, of course, WikiLeaks starting on this, on the last time the North Node was in Pisces, I think is significant. Now, I'm just going to check my notes here. I want to make sure I got all of these things. I also thought what was interesting was the documentary An Inconvenient Truth was also, produced in this North Node in Pisces season. And if you remember, that was all about the sense of global warming. And this was, Al Gore's campaign really to make us all aware of what global warming was done and what a big issue it is for us 18 and so years later as we see evidence of global warming. Really in our face. In the week that the North Node entered Pisces with all the fires and that terrible destruction in Los Angeles, and certainly the flames have been fanned by global warming. It is part of the story. It may not be all of the story of those fires, but it is a big part of the story. And I thought it was just interesting that Al Gore's, he didn't make the film, but he was part of the film, if you like. It was about his campaign, came out during this period of the North Node in Pisces. Now, another one was Michael Moore's documentary called Sicko. And this was a documentary about the ills and, errors of the US health and care system. I thought was very interesting. Also, Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, maybe not all of you know who he was. He was a British journalist, great writer, great thinker, really a rather wonderful observer of humanity. He wrote a book called God is Not Great, and it was really an examination and a criticism of organized religion. See how that really echoes that kind of Pisces theme about religion, about the spiritual versus the orthodox sense of religion. Other things for you to remember: Madeleine McCann disappeared during the time the North Node was in Pisces. So I am suspecting that we will see an arrest and a prison sentence and the end of the Madeleine McCann mystery as we go through this North Node in Pisces period. I just want to check if I have got everything on this list. Oh, yes. And I think Benazir Bhutto was assassinated. Now, she was the former prime minister of Pakistan. And there is a sense of sacrifice with Benazir. If you look back and you think about her history, again, you may despise her, or she's obviously not with us anymore, but I don't want to get into the politics of all of this, whether she was good or bad, it's an opinion. But whatever it was, she was a symbol, and she was an icon, if you like, and she was assassinated. And I think we've got to bring this into a North Node in Pisces as well. We see somebody who is an icon, someone who represents more than just themselves. We will see a sacrifice. We will see some kind of assassination, and we'll also see people cut down to size, which of course means all sorts of things, doesn't it? It's again this idea of people falling off their perch. So a rather important aspect of the North Node in Pisces, and something really to keep a watch out for during these next 18 months. Which brings me back in a way, this idea of sacrifice. When we look at astrology and we think about the Virgo Pisces axis, it's often called the martyr savior axis. And that is because these two signs are really associated with this, with these functions. And a lot of the time when I'm looking at the 6th house or the 12th house, and of course Pisces rules the 12th house, Virgo rules the 6th house, we do the work of spirit in the 6th house, and we go beyond the earthly. We go beyond into the world of spirit in the 12th house. So we have this sense of these two opposites having, as always, a lot to do with each other. And when we have a lot of Virgo and Pisces in our own charts, we really do have, especially personal planets or the ascendant, descendant axis, then we constantly have to remind ourselves that even if we have been victimized and it has been unfair, that we don't get stuck in the groove of being a victim, that one of the lessons that we must learn about being a victim, being a martyr for a cause, whatever it may be, is to transcend that and actually not to take it personally. That's one of the challenges of this Virgo-Pisces axis. I also mentioned that eclipses take place on and around the nodal axis, and eclipses are portents and signatures on fateful events, on random events, things that change the dynamics of a situation and often affect humanity or groups of people. And sometimes, of course, when we look at what's happened in our own lives, we find that's effective in our own lives as well. So we need to look at these very important points in 2025, and of course there'll be some in 2026 as well, when the eclipses take place. We already had an eclipse on the Virgo-Pisces axis on the 18th of September last year. And one of the things about that time, if you go back to that time, there was a lot going on in the world, and a lot of it really coming to fruition at this point. And I'm thinking particularly about what was going on in Donald Trump's life at that point, where we had a crescendo of judgments and court cases and goodness knows what else was going on. And the interesting thing is, here we come now to this point in the year where all of that is behind him, all of that is going, and now he's, officially taking on his role tomorrow. Well, from my perspective, tomorrow. So I think that's very interesting. But the first eclipse of this year in Pisces Virgo is the one on the 14th of March. Now, this is a significant one because Saturn is very, very close to the Sun at this point. So we've really, although the Sun-Saturn conjunction is going to occur on a slightly different day, it's close enough to the eclipse to be part of the eclipse story. And it's none too far from Neptune as well. And Neptune is about to enter Aries at the end of the month. So we've got this idea, we're getting full volume Saturn, Neptune, this whole theme of how we have to have compassion, how whatever's going and happening at the time is something we may feel we have no control over, so we must rise above it, so to speak. But a lot of other events are surely going to take place of global significance in that late March period. And of course, we go on through April as well, but that's another story. So the second eclipse on the Virgo-Pisces axis is going to be the 7th of September. And that's, again, it's a total lunar eclipse, just as the one on the 14th of March was. And although really and truly an eclipse is an eclipse, is an eclipse, whether it's a total lunar eclipse or a partial lunar eclipse, still an eclipse. It's not quite as dramatic as a solar eclipse. And when the whole of the sun is blacked out by the moon passing between it, Earth passing between the moon and the sun, that's the same thing is happening, and we don't see it in quite the same way. So it still packs a powerful punch. So we need to again focus our minds on that mid-September period, and more importantly, actually, is the partial solar eclipse, which occurs on the 21st of September. That's a big date for your astrological diaries, because that occurs again with Saturn and Neptune very much in the midst of things. And all through the year, and I have mentioned this, I certainly mentioned it in my year aheads, this idea that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is just in the early degrees of Aries, are going to slip back again into Pisces later on in the year, is this idea that regimes falter, regimes fail on a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I look particularly, of course, at Russia at this time, but there could be other regimes that struggle. And we need to look at these eclipse points for that. And again, while we wouldn't call royal families regimes, they are organizations, and certainly the British royal family is very responsive, receptive. It resonates with the Saturn-Neptune cycle. So there will be changes in the British monarchy during the course of this year, some of which will be shocking and disturbing, but it is the part of the story of life we must always remember. So everybody, I think that I have given you a really good guide to what the nodal axis in Pisces means. I've given you suggestions as to how we should look at it and how we can consciously embrace it. And also, you know, what it means in collective terms and global events. And, you know, we have seen a lot of suffering. And right now, as we, you know, as I'm talking to you, we think about the suffering of everybody in the Middle East situation, the Palestinians, and we think of the Israelis. Everybody has suffered. And we think about the suffering going on in other parts of the world, in Ukraine, Russia. Russia is suffering. There is a lot of it around. And it's having compassion for that suffering that's so important. I mean, we live in a world where people give opinions all the time, don't we? We watch our YouTube channels and there's somebody there giving an opinion. And I mean, we like it when those opinions agree with us, and we don't like it when they don't agree with us, as you know. But I think just recently, when I've glanced some, particularly the royal ones, some of the criticism, I think, of Meghan and Harry is quite poisonous. And I don't think that's good. I mean, rightly or wrongly, Meghan and Harry are the architects of their own fate. And what's happening to them is largely through their own actions. And we should have compassion for that, rather than a certain element of glee that this is happening. Oh, bring them down. That's completely wrong, because we have fallen into traps of our own making. We are not perfect. And it is in having compassion for ourselves and seeing why we've made mistakes and what we can learn from them and where we have to go out to people. And when we think again of the idea of the 12-step program, which has somehow come into a couple of my videos recently, that one of the steps in that program is to make amends, is to go to all the people you've hurt by your behavior and apologize. And that's just an important act, that when we do recognize we made a mistake and somebody has suffered because of our mistakes, we need to make amends. And I think this is so powerfully said or implied in this nodal axis, Pisces, Virgo, that again, we can embrace it and make it real and help ourselves move forward as we go. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.